Okay, this is chapter 25 of An Uncommon Gift. And then when you get to the end, I'm going to decide whether I'm going to keep going or not. We'll think about it for maybe a few days next week and make a decision about what I want to do. The Davis family arrived on time and knocked on the Masons' front door. Bobby opened the door and greeted them, and Mom and Dad were right behind him. Bobby had left his TAC tape deck on the stairs with some cables and an extension cord in case he needed it. The RCA cables that he had were 3 meters long, so he had plenty of length to reach behind the back of Charles's Nakamichi deck. He was hoping to have plenty of time to be able to make 2 copies of yesterday's recordings. He brought 2 blank tapes for his effort. They all shared their greetings, and the Davises remarked what a beautiful van the Masons has purchased. They were looking forward to the ride to the Millers. Bobby's mom hit the button on her key fob and the tailgate lifted slowly, and Bobby and Diane jumped in the back. The sliding door opened just as easily, and the guests had no trouble getting in the middle seat with plenty of room to spare. They arrived and piled out of the van with Bobby carrying his cassette deck and the cables up to the front door and hitting the doorbell with a magnificent-sounding Big Ben chime. Charles answered and welcomed everyone to Shays Miller with a big laugh. He saw that Bobby brought his cassette tape deck and told Bobby to go into the study and do what he needed to do. Bobby was a little amazed that Charles trusted him with all that expensive audio gear, but to Charles it was just some music playback equipment, just better than what most people had. But he knew Bobby respected the gear, so Charles was not worried. Charles ushered the adults back to the music room where Cassandra was still fussing about with a slight sense of nervousness about the afternoon, very unlike her. But she knew that this was the first time everyone was going to hear a composition played by professionals. The first time of anything brings some nervousness to most. Charles walked the families into the room, and Cassandra greeted them warmly and thanked the Davis family for coming, as she was most excited to really get to meet them. Mrs. Davis remarked on their beautiful home and that they were most glad to see what Diane and Bobby had been so excited about. Cassandra took them over to the beverage table and asked them to serve themselves with anything that they liked, and the 4 adults did just that. Some other guests from the symphony were arriving as well, as were the 2 performers that were going to be playing with Cassandra. In the room set up by the grand piano were 3 chairs with music stands in front. Charles had set up the music stands and the 2 mic stands, as well as positioning the mic cables, but leaving them on the floor for Bobby to do the connecting. The cables were long enough to reach into Charles' study, where Bobby would be doing the recording, and no one would see what he was up to. Diane was going to sit in the performance room and listen to the performance live, while Bobby would be in the study listening on the headphones as to what was being recorded. Once the new recorder and gear were picked up by Charles tomorrow, all the recordings would be done in the same room. For now, this was just fine. After a few minutes of conversation, Cassandra announced that their performance was about to begin, and for everyone to find a seat and get comfortable, which they did. The 3 performers began to warm up. As Bobby walked into the room and mounted the Neumann mics on the stands and attached the balanced mic cables and positioned them 27 inches apart, about 6 feet in front and 6 feet high from the performers. He walked back into the study and put on headphones and set the levels, leaving the pan controls exactly where Dave had put them yesterday. He put the Nakamichi deck in record pause and saw that the meters were picking up the performers practicing and the guests chatting, and the peaks were just touching 0 dB, which is what he wanted. He waited until Cassandra had asked if everyone was ready, And with that, Bobby took a pause, and the recorder and the tape were rolling, and the red recording light told him he was capturing what was about to happen. Cassandra gave a brief introduction to her composition, and this was the world premiere, even though it was taking place at their home. She announced that in 2 weeks they would all be performing at Schwartz Auditorium at Cornell University at 8 p.m. on that Saturday, and that she would also be performing a special piece with Bobby and Diane Davis, whom she introduced to the crowd with her proud parents. She said that the young man setting up the mics was the same Bobby who was also going to be doing recording chores of this concert, and she introduced Bill and Mary Mason, Bobby's parents. With those announcements out of the way, she said, "Let's begin our concert," and that she hoped everyone would like what she created. With that, the players readied their violin and cello, and Cassandra was also ready with her flute. With her right hand, she gave everyone the downbeat, as the violin and cello had an 8-bar introduction before Cassandra joined them. Their playing was as remarkable as the piece Cassandra had created, and what Bobby heard coming through the headphones was breathtaking for sure. It sounded like he was right in the room with all of them. The composition started off with a slow pace, and then gradually gained some tempo, and then the music had some calls and replies, with just Cassandra playing, and then the violin replying, and then the cello. There was much unison playing as well, with the violin and cello playing second harmony parts, but overall, it was a tremendously inventive composition. No one was really surprised, as Cassandra was a remarkable flute player, as her 25 years with the symphony could attest. The piece lasted 25 minutes, with various solos also a part of the composition, and the performers were enjoying the work as much as the audience. Once finished, the audience burst into raucous applause and rose to their feet. The performers rose and took a well-deserved bow. Then everyone turned to Cassandra and applauded even more as she took a bow for her brilliant composition. Everyone knew they had just experienced something very special, and that everyone who attended the university premiere in 2 weeks was in for a real treat. Bobby let the recorder keep playing through the applause and then slowly reduced the volume to fade it out to complete the recording. He then rewound the tape to ready it for playback for those who wanted to hear it. He quickly played it back twice and added it to the copies of the recordings he and Diane and Cassandra had made Saturday so that they could be listening to it all, both Saturday and Sunday's performance. He then rewound the tape to the beginning for the next playback. Charles had hired one of the chefs from Mario's to come handle the cooking chores on the patio, so after the concert he went into the study to see Bobby. Bobby handed Charles the headphones so he could hear the recording. Bobby hit play as Charles took a seat at the recording desk chair and sat quietly while he listened. The grin on his face broadened wider and wider as he was loving what he was hearing. He gave Bobby a pat on the back while he was listening to about 10 minutes of the performance. He took the headphones off and said to Bobby, "You did a great recording job, Mr. Engineer," he said with a huge smile, and gave Bobby a big hug. "Well done, my boy," said Charles. "Cassandra is going to love this," he added. "Let's go in and join the others and have something to eat." With that, they headed out to the patio to join the other guests. Bobby was very pleased that Charles was happy, and more happy that he did not mess up something. He knew that if he paid attention to what Dave Johnson did yesterday and followed directions, all would come out well, which it did. Bobby was beginning to enjoy the recording of music as much as playing. Now he knew why Dave liked recording, even though he was not a musician himself. He found a way to benefit others and capture their dreams, a remarkable use of technology for sure. They all had a great time once again at the Millers and met some new friends from the symphony. After about an hour and a half, the performers asked if they could hear the recording, and they, Cassandra and Charles, headed off to the study to audition their performances. Diane followed. Bobby followed the sequence of turning on the Macintosh stereo and made sure the volume control was set to 0. He made sure the preamp selector was set to tape, and Bobby had already reconnected the RCA cables from the Nakamichi deck to the preamp for playback through the stereo. The performers all took a seat on the love seat, and Cassandra took a seat at Charles' desk behind them, and Bobby hit play on the recorder. Cassandra's introduction came through the magical M9s, and then the glorious music started, as it was one of those is it real or not moments that everyone who recorded anything worried about. It was so moving and beautiful, and everyone was shocked at how great it sounded through the huge magical speakers. It was clear to Charles and Cassandra that even though they cost a small fortune, those speakers were worth every penny. Charles walked over to Cassandra's side and put his arm around her and leaned down and kissed her warmly on the cheek. The tears were rolling down her eyes as she was so happy with what she was hearing. She knew that she was hearing that all of the years of practice and playing in the symphony had paid off and were a blessing to her, Charles, and all those who had been able to hear her play over the years. Now she was getting to hear herself, all due to the help of a nearly 14-year-old boy who was becoming quite a musician himself, but a greater friend, as was his family. When the tape came to an end, everyone in the room started applauding Cassandra again, and then looked at Bobby and thanked him for doing the recording work. He loved their appreciation, but more he loved all that he was learning, and the kindness of the Millers had made all of this possible. It was truly an uncommon gift.